Good day, sir. I am Jana Hill, and this is my learning compilation in logic and critical thinking. First, what is logic and critical thinking? So, this is the process of evaluating truth conditions and legitimacy of connections between statements. It is the foundational discipline that focuses on the principles of valid reasoning and sound judgment. This develops the habit of clear thinking and guides us in drawing conclusions. As to definiteness of meaning, we have univocal, equivocal, and analogous. So, univocal refers to the terms with exactly the same meaning in at least two occurrences. For example, James, John, and Jones are nurse. The univocal term here is the nurse. It has the same exact meaning, meaning all of them are nurses. Then the equivocal refers to the terms that have completely different meanings in at least two occurrences. For example, we need light at night. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. The univocal term here is light. In we need light at night, the term light here refers to electricity for us to be able to see at night. In Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light here refers to as hope or guidance for us human beings. Next is analogous. Analogous are the terms that have partly the same and partly different meanings in at least two occurrences. For example, he ran as he ran the power mower. In this, the analogous term is run. It has the same meaning but somehow different. Now let's come to as ultimate element of proposition. So S refers to subject, C is copula, then P is predicate. Subject is which is talk about the sentence, then the predicate is which tells about the subject, either an affirmation or denial, then copula links the subject and the predicate. For example, all boys are future men. All is the quantifier, boys is the subject, are is the copula, and future men is the predicate. Next is logical symbol, the four standard proposition. For the quantity, there is universal and particular. For the quality, there is affirmative and negative. So for the universal affirmative, every subject is predicate. Then for the universal negative, no subject is predicate. Then for particular affirmative, some subject is predicate, and particular negative, some subject is not predicate. An example of universal affirmative, every monkey is an animal. Example of universal negative, no monkey is a human. An example of particular affirmative, some monkeys are brown. And example of particular negative, some monkeys are not brown. Next is the square of opposition. In the square of opposition, we have contradictories, contrary, subcontrary, and subaltern. The rules for contradictories: if one is true, the other is false. If one is false, the other is true. For example, all men are rational is true. Therefore, some men are not rational is false. The rules in contrary: if one is true, the other is false. If one is false, the other is doubtful. For example, no students are girls is false. Therefore, every students are girls is doubtful. In subcontrary, the rules are: if one is true, the other is doubtful. If one is false, the other is true. For example, some students are girls is true, therefore some students are not girls is doubtful. In subalterns, the rules are: if the universal is true, the particular is false. If the universal is false, the particular is doubtful. For example, all triangles are planes with three sides is true. Therefore, some triangles are planes with three sides is true. Next is the simple categorical syllogism. So the basic structure, a simple categorical syllogism is composed of three categorical or attribute propositions, so put together that the subject and the predicate of a conclusion are united or separated through the intermediacy of a middle term. Major term is the predicate of the conclusion. It must occur in the conclusion and in the premise. Therefore, the first, which is therefore called the major premise. Major term shall be symbolized by a big letter T, or a display of structure of the syllogism more graphically by a rectangle. The minor term is the subject of the conclusion. It must occur in the conclusion and in the premise in which the term does not occur. It is often introduced by a assertive conjunction, but minor term shall be designed by small letter t, or a display of structure of a syllogism more graphically by an ellipse. The middle term occurs in each of the premise, but not in the conclusion. The major premise, it occurs in the conjunction with the major term, and in the minor premise in conjunction with the minor term. It is the medium through which the major and minor term are united in the affirmative syllogism and separated in negative syllogism. As opposed to the middle term, the minor and major terms are called extremes. Next is the general rules of categorical syllogism. The rules of the term: first is their number, second is their arrangement, third is the quality of the minor and major term, then the fourth is the quality of the middle term. In terms of their quality, fifth is if both premises are affirmative, sixth is if one premise is affirmative and the other is negative, seventh is if both premises are negative. In terms of their quantity, this corollaries with rules 3 and 4. 8 is at least one premise must be, and 9 if a premise is particular, the conclusion must be. Next is the violations. First is the fallacy of 4 terms or 5. It occurs if there are actually 4 terms in the syllogism and there are no middle term that serves as a medium of comparison between the minor and the major term. Second is the fallacy of equivocation. This is committed when the term applied to one premise has different meaning as applied to the other proposition in the syllogism. The third one is the fallacy of amphiboly. This arises when there is the use of analogous terms. The fourth one is the fallacy of illicit minor. This occurs if the minor term is universal in the conclusion but particular in the minor premise. No illicit processes if the minor term is universal in the major premise but particular in the conclusion. Next is the fallacy of undistributed middle term. This fallacy violates the syllogistic rule which prescribes the middle term must be used at least once as universal in any of the premises. Next is the fallacy on negative conclusion. This occurs when we draw a conclusion from two negative premises. Next is the fallacy of affirmative conclusion. This occurs when we draw an affirmative conclusion. Next is the fallacy of negative premise. This occurs when we draw a negative conclusion. Next is the logical form of categorical syllogism, figures and moods. The figure of a categorical syllogism consists of the arrangement of the middle term in the premises. There are 4 figures and each is defined by a position of the middle term in the syllogism. In the first figure, the middle term is the subject of the major premise and the predicate of the minor premise. The rules for the first figure: first is the minor premise must be affirmative to avoid the illicit major when the minor premise is made. The second rule is the major premise must be universal, otherwise violation of undistributed middle term will be committed. In the second figure, the middle term is the predicate of both premises. The rules for the second figure: first is one premise must be negative to avoid the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Then the second rule is the major premise must be universal, otherwise the violation of illicit minor term will be committed. In the third figure, the middle term is the subject of both premises. The rules for the third figure is the minor premise must be affirmative to avoid the fallacy of illicit major. Then the conclusion must be particular; if not, the violation of this rule gives rise to the fallacy of illicit minor. In the fourth figure, the middle term is the predicate of the major premise and the subject of the minor premise. The rules for the fourth figure: if the major premise is affirmative, the minor premise must be universal to ensure the avoidance of the fallacy of undistributed middle term. Second, if the minor premise is affirmative, the conclusion must be particular; otherwise, the violation of illicit minor term will be committed. That's all for my learning compilation, and thank you for listening.